I mean, I'm all for horror mayhem, but around here, every month is horror month. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome or welcome back to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for spending some time with me today. So today I have a wrap up of the books that I finished in the back half of April, as well as a glimpse of what I hope to read for May. It's ambitious. It's an ambitious list of books for May, but we'll see how many of them we can get through. As I mentioned in my last wrap-up video a couple weeks ago, for the first half of April, audiobooks have really kind of saved my reading in that I have been a lot busier with monastery work and with teaching than I had anticipated being, and as a result, a lot of my reading has been through audiobooks, which has been really wonderful. The one thing I will say about audiobooks is that for me, I read audiobooks from the library, and so it's kind of dependent on what is available. So I have a bunch of holds put out for 24 books, and whenever one is available, then I have a few weeks to read it. So my schedule, my TBR, my pile of possibilities is to a large extent, modified by what the library makes available at any given time. And as a result of that, my reading is neither entirely scheduled nor mood reading. There's also just a little bit of randomness or chaos mixed in. And for now, that's working. We'll see how it goes. So what did I read the back half of April? I had a very productive reading month, especially if we count all my audiobooks. So let's start with what I actually finished in the back half of April. The first book that I finished, or I want to talk about, is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Now, I loved this. Not only did I love this on its own, I read this as a buddy read with Pat from Book Chat with Pat, and we read it in chunks, and then we'd email each other all of our thoughts back and forth throughout the week. And even though she is in America and I'm in India, we managed to have a discussion after we finished it to kind of wrap up all of our thoughts. And that was a really wonderful experience. So never mind how great the novel is, but a chance to do a buddy read with Pat was really wonderful, to hear her thoughts on it, to get a chance to look at it in a way that I wouldn't normally. And so she points out things, or she was drawn to things in the novel that weren't my first line of attention. So it was really a wonderful experience. She really is an incredible person and an incredible reader. So getting a chance to do a buddy read with her and to be part of her reading process or her reading journey was really wonderful. As for the book itself, I think most people that are watching my channel probably have some idea of what it's about. It takes place in the far future. It has to do with bioengineering and terraforming planets and humans that are on an ark ship because Earth is uninhabitable, who have been in deep sleep for thousands of years, come across a planet only to find out first that there is a rogue AI who is guarding the planet, but then also that that planet, due to some quirks of a virus that is intended to speed up evolution that didn't quite work the way people intended it to, there are these giant sentient spiders who are ruling this planet. And the humans have to decide how they are going to go about finding a place for themselves on this planet. I think it's beautifully, beautifully written. I've gotten really into Adrian Tchaikovsky this last year. I know I'm late to the bandwagon. I think this is his 5th novel I've read, maybe his 6th, as well as a novella and some short stories. And I've read across different genres that he's written. And basically, I am in completionist mode, always having one of his books on the go until I get through his whole back catalog. That's kind of where I am right now. And like everything I've read from Tchaikovsky so far, the writing is superb. The world building is incredible. The intelligence and wit behind his writing is hard to beat. He creates a society that is all spiders, and he follows the kind of biological expectation of what would happen if these spiders were able to keep evolving, if they had some sort of, short circuit or some fast forward that allowed them to continue evolving. So there's a scientific logic behind how he creates these worlds and these characters, and then the characters come from within them. And not only does he have really detailed, elaborate, heartwarming world building and character development and character depth and profiles, he also has something to say in his stories. So even this has a lot to say about the human condition, about what humans value, about what it is that makes us understand ourselves as important beings in the universe. There's also a really beautiful kind of feminist message going through, especially when you look at the Spider Society, which is a matriarchal society, and Tchaikovsky's ability to marry interesting things to think about and philosophical ideas with really crisp, beautiful writing and engaging characters and world building I'm really, really impressed. So this was a wonderful book. I'm sure I'll have more to say when I continue with the series, because I'll probably do a wrap up of the whole series. That's the first book I want to talk about. I can't spend that long on all the books, so I'm gonna have to move a little more quickly. Next one, I finished Imago, which is the 3rd in the Xenogenesis trilogy by Octavia E. Butler. This is a buddy read with Carl, and we will be having a discussion about this later in the week, and I'm sure that video will go up on his channel. So, I did not enjoy this as much as I enjoyed the first two books in the series. On my channel, there is a video of Carl and me discussing the second book in the series, and on his channel, there's already a video of us discussing the first book. So the first book is called Dawn, the second book is called Adulthood Rights. Of the three, this was my least favorite, but I'll have more thoughts on that once I have my discussion with Carl. Next, I finished a book that I was reading when I made my last video, and that is Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution by Eli Mistel. And this is a nonfiction book, obviously. And Eli Mistel is a trained lawyer and a journalist, and he looks at the Constitution, specifically the Bill of Rights, and basically why the whole thing needs to be rethought out. His underlining premise is that this is a document that was written by misogynist slaveholders, and therefore we don't have to give it the value or credit that we currently give it, and the whole thing could be redone in a way to make it better. I thought that was a really entertaining and informative book read by the author, and I really enjoyed it. Moving on, I finished The Butcher's Daughter, The Hitherto Untold Story of Mrs. Lovett. And this is by David Demchik and Corinne Lee Clark. And this I read as an ARC, an advanced reader copy, so I have a review either coming out or maybe already released by the time this video comes out. This is telling the story of Mrs. Lovett from Sweeney Todd. It isn't a retelling of Sweeney Todd, but it is telling the point of view of her character, starting from when she was a child, up through when she meets Sweeney Todd, and then beyond. And I enjoyed it. The whole story is told as an epistolary story, so it's all letters from Mrs. Lovett to a reporter. And the reporter, you find out, is missing. Like, the very opening of the book is a police report mentioning that this reporter is missing. Her boarding room was unlocked and none of her possessions were taken, but she isn't anywhere to be found. But these correspondences were found. And so then the majority of the book are these letters from this woman, who you find out is Mrs. Lovett, to the reporter. So there's this meta mystery of where is this reporter. And that is interesting, but I will say I did not love the epistolary nature of this story, especially because it's not only epistolary, but it's also this retrospective first person. So the time of these letters is 50 years after the events of Sweeney Todd, or A String of Pearls, which is what the original Penny Dreadful was titled. So it's not only that it's epistolary and it's all written, it's all in the form of letters, but it is also like talking about things that have already happened. It creates a distance from the main character and from the action of the story that I just wanted to be there with the character, because I thought that the life they gave this character was really interesting. So I enjoyed it. I just, the format didn't wow me. And it's not the first epistolary novel I've read this year. I've read, I think, 3 or 4 horror novels that were all done in the epistolary mode. And of them, this was kind of the least convincing that it needed to be this way. If it was just following the character in real time, I think it would have been more effective because it would have been more intense and more immediate. But the meta story of this missing reporter was interesting, and it did allow for an interesting kind of reveal at the end. So I don't know, give and take. It's up to you. If you like that kind of story, maybe you'll enjoy it. If you're already not so down on epistolary format novels, then this one doesn't seem to justify that format. But I do have a review already on my channel for it, so you're free to watch that. Next, I finished a book called Edenville by Sam Rabeline, and this came out in 2022 or 2023, I think, and I enjoyed this quite a lot. This is like a mixture of body horror and eldritch horror that is centered around kind of millennial malaise and ennui. The main character is married to an author, a first-time horror author, and he wrote this kind of interdimensional horror novel, and it sold really well, but he hasn't been able to write anything since then. And you find out all these other things that are happening in the background, but he's invited to this small college in Edenville to do a 1-semester workshop or something to be an artist in residence. But there's obviously nefarious things happening. And there's this really wonderful meta element where he and the girlfriend, who you really are following the girlfriend, she's the main character that you're following or spending most of your time with, they know like all of the traps of feeling like you're in a horror movie, and yet they do it anyway. So there's this really beautiful, playful meta element of knowing what it means to be a writer who writes horror stories, who is constantly being rejected, and knowing what it means to live in a post-Scream world. Basically, Scream is one of the, this movie that really turned slashers on their head and turned the idea of horror novels and horror stories on their head. So all the characters have to be aware that they're in a horror story. It wasn't the first one to do that, but it was one of the first ones to make a really big dent in the public consciousness. And I just thought it was really playfully done. So Edenville is a really fun horror movie, horror novel. It's fast moving. It has this meta aspect that maybe can be a little bit twee, but I thought worked for it. It has some really great imagery, the kind of, interdimensional horror, the body horror, all of these different things mixing together. So I think it checks off a lot of boxes. So I had a really fun time with this one. Next, a little more vintage, I read Haunted by James Herbert. So James Herbert obviously is famous for writing Rats and the other books in the Rats series. This is another one of his novels. This is actually the first in a series that all follow the same character, who is a paranormal investigator who also happens to be psychic, but he doesn't know he's psychic in this novel. And it's basically a haunted house novel. And it follows a lot of the tropes of a haunted house novel, but it has this main character, the protagonist, who doesn't believe in ghosts. And he works for this paranormal research institute. And his whole job is to kind of disprove the existence of ghosts. And, I thought it was fine. I thought it was fun. It moved really quickly. The main character's position is that ghosts don't exist, but paranormal activity does exist. So he doesn't believe in the supernatural, but he does believe in the paranormal. And it's a really weird dividing line that he is kind of making for himself. And the good thing is the other characters all kind of agree. And they're all like, this is just foolish, way that you distract yourself from allowing yourself to believe in something. So it was fun. It was interesting. There are 2 more books in the series. I couldn't find hard copies of them. This I got at a used bookstore recently. I looked for copies of the other ones. I couldn't find it, but I do have soft copies available. So we'll see if I continue with this or not. The next 2 books I read were rereads. In the first half of the month, I reread Hell Follows With Us by Andrew Joseph White. And then the second half, I reread his other 2 novels as well, The Spirit Bares Its Teeth and Compound Fracture. And, I've been reading his books as he releases them. He's been releasing one a year. And he has another novel coming out later in the year, an adult novel, his adult novel debut as it is, because these are all considered YA. And rereading them now just reminded me how powerful of a writer he is. I really enjoyed them. The Spirit Bares Its Teeth also takes place in late 19th century London, in the very same place as The Butcher's Daughter, actually. And the conceit in this novel is that spirit work, the ability to pierce the veil between the living and the dead, has become accepted. There are people that can do this, and it is now government sanctioned. And of course, only men can do it. Women aren't allowed to do it, even though some have the gift. And the people that have the gift for it are noted that they have purple eyes. And so the women that are born with purple eyes are basically sold away to be married to other men with purple eyes, with the hopes that they'll be producing male heirs who have this skill of being able to do spirit work. The main character is a young man who is a trans boy. He's 16, and he is trying to escape his family, who won't recognize him as a man or as a boy at that point, I guess. And he ends up getting caught doing spirit work, and as a result of that, he gets put into this sanatorium for young women who have veil sickness, as it's called. And he finds out that there are all these other nefarious things happening at this sanatorium, and it kind of goes on from there. It's really heartbreaking, really heart-wrenching. And of his 3 novels, I think this is the one that's most emotional and is the hardest to read, actually, of the 3 that he's published so far. But I really, really enjoyed it. I'm so glad I reread it. But it is, it's a little bit of a sucker punch, as is the other novel of his that I read, Compound Fracture. This takes place, I think, in 2017 in West Virginia, in, coal mining country. The main character is, again, a trans youth, 16 years old. And the opening chapter, he gets beat almost to death by the sheriff's son, because there you find out there is a long feud between the sheriff's family and his family. His great-great-grandfather led a revolt from the coal workers, the coal miners. And then the revolt was put down when his great-great-grandfather was murdered by the sheriff at that time, who was the great-great-grandfather of the current sheriff. So there's been this blood feud between his family and the sheriff's family in this small coal mining town for generations. And so the sheriff's son beats him almost to death and meant to kill him, but was interrupted. And then the story goes from there. He starts having these ghostly visions about what it means to kind of stand up for himself and to fight for his family and fight for the working class. And there's a very strong socialist message that's mixed in with this that he's not shy about at all. And that was my complaint the first time I read it, was simply that it felt almost a little bit didactic in the way it was laying on this political message. But when you realize that it is a YA novel, it's written from the point of view of a 16-year-old boy. So the way a 16-year-old understands the world is many times much more immediate and colorful than the way a jaded, middle-aged person would experience the world. And so as a result of that, especially rereading it a second time, that was not a hang-up for me at all. I thought it worked really, really well for the story. And so I really enjoyed it again. So the next 2 books I read were both rereads. And they were both kind of heavy emotional stories about the trans experience in America and basically how awful we can treat each other sometimes. And even though there are really important, beautiful signs of solidarity and support in his stories, and his stories ultimately have a message of hope and resilience, it's like a train wreck to get there. It's a gut punch to get there. And so then the next book I read kind of remedied that in some ways, and that is a collection of short stories called Amplitudes, Stories of Queer and Trans Futurity. This is edited by Lee Mandello, and this is actually coming out later in the month. I read an advanced reader copy, and this is 22 short stories that are all speculative fiction of some sort. So some are more on the fantasy side, some are more on the science fiction side, some are kind of their own genre in between, and these are much more hopeful stories. They're all written by queer authors with mainly queer characters and many trans characters as well in many of the stories, if not all of them. And the stories weren't all like easy. They weren't all fluffy and fun. There was danger, there was dystopia, there was oppression, yet there was a real palpable sense of joy and of love in these stories. And it was really reinvigorating in many ways, considering how dark a lot of the stories are that I read, especially stories that are navigating, historically marginalized or oppressed communities or identities. To read this collection of short stories that was celebrating queer life and trans life and doing it in a way that was looking forward to what could be possible in the future was really invigorating, and I really enjoyed it. Not all the stories were great. That's what happens when you have almost 24 stories in a collection, but enough of them were really, really good to make the whole collection worth it. So I had a good time with that. And continuing this weird run of historical fiction, which I don't usually read a lot of, but continuing with it, I read a novel called The Warm Hands of Ghosts, and this is by Catherine Arden. This takes place during the First World War, and this was really wonderful. I listened to this as an audiobook and has two narrators, and that's because the main story is told from the point of view of a woman who is a battle nurse, and she's so impressive. Like, it's such an impressive occupation, and she actually has been discharged due to being injured, and she's home in Canada, where she's from. She wants to go back to the battlefield to find her brother. Her parents, in the opening chapter, both of her parents are killed in an explosion that happens in this seaside town that they live in. And so she has nothing left except for her brother, who she believes is probably alive, but they have sent all of his belongings to her, including his clothes and his tags, but both of his tags. Usually, when someone dies, they send you one tag, and one tag stays with the body. But she was sent both of his tags. So she doesn't know why. And when she's asking questions, they don't have a body. They just have his possessions. So she's convinced she has to go find him. So she wants to return to the battlefield and return to the front of the war to find him. And she figures out a way back with a woman who is kind of running a private hospital on the battlefield, or on the front of the war. So the story is mostly told from her perspective, but then you also get some chapters from her brother's perspective. And the timelines aren't quite the same. So the brother's perspective jumps you backwards in time a little bit until these two stories meet at some point, near closer to the end of the book. And it's just really heartwarming. The love between brother and sister, I think, is really powerful. I think the story has a supernatural element, but that supernatural element is just really showing the hell that is war and the meaningless that is war and who is suffering in war. And it's definitely not the people that are making war happen, but everyone else, and it's a really beautiful story. Again, there's a supernatural element that doesn't feel heavy-handed. It is critical to the plot, but it isn't a horror story. It is a really heartwarming story about family and about being there for those who you care about. And so I really, really enjoyed it. And there's only one other book that I finished in the month, and that is a novella by Adrian Tchaikovsky called Ogres. This is part of his series called The Terrible Worlds Revolutions. So he has these little mini series of novellas that are called the Terrible Worlds series. And so there's Terrible Worlds Revolutions that has 3 stories. There is Terrible Worlds Destinations that has 3 novellas, and there is Terrible Worlds Innovations, which I think right now only has 1 novella, another one being published later in the year, and I imagine a 3rd one probably next year. And this was really great. It started out feeling like a riff on Robin Hood. Very explicitly, there's a character called Robin Hood. So that's like the, medieval forest / feudal environment. That's like the vibe that you're getting. And it's all written in the second person. So there's this weird meta narration. And I won't give anything away about it, except that it's called ogres because the people that live in these small villages, these small towns, they have to pay their tithes, their taxes to the ogres. So the ogres are the masters. The ogres, stand, feet above everyone, and they are so much more powerful than everyone. And they're the ones that are the masters. They're in control. And our main character is the son of the town headsman, who the town selectman, basically, who's responsible for collecting all of the town's taxes and everything to present to the ogres when they come. And the story goes places that at first they feel like this is just a normal story looking at, class struggle essentially, but it goes somewhere entirely different. And the ending is really beautifully done. And along the way, it has Tchaikovsky's kind of characteristic, really smart writing, really heartfelt writing, really interesting characters. And to have the whole thing written in second person with this narrator who is making you as a reader complicit in this story, right? You are part of it because you are being told you are doing this. You are a hero, of course, aren't you? And as a result of that, you really feel involved in the story. So I really enjoyed it. It was a really quick read too. It's just a novella. And that's the last thing I finished. Wow, this video is already going so long, so I'm going to rush through. I'm currently reading 3 books. The one of them I will be done with probably today, and that is Spiderlight, again by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is wildly different from everything else I've read from him so far. This is pure fantasy. It feels like a D&D campaign that's just put into a novel form. It's quite short, especially by Tchaikovsky standards, and I'm loving it. It's so wonderful. The characters that are part of our campaign are all really interesting and exciting. The campaign itself feels meaningful, and the world building, again, is exquisitely done. And the moral ambiguity of what's going on, I think, is the best part. Like, that's what he does so well. Our characters are quote unquote ambassadors for the light, and there's the light and the dark. So clearly everything has to be, bifurcated. And this kind of, you either are with us or against us. But of course, some humans are drawn to the dark. Some humans can't help it. But there are other things that are born in the dark. And if they're born of the dark, there's no saving them. So our main character is this priestess who is like the warrior for the light. And she has this band of people around her that are helping her in her quest. But they're all compromised to one degree or another. And she's constantly looking at what compromises have to be made, and it causes her to question her idea of, of faith, essentially, and what does it mean to always be right, and that there is this like binary of light and dark, and everything has to fit into this mold. And so they're going on a quest to destroy the Dark Tower, interestingly enough, which is clearly a nod to Stephen King. And there's also some really cheeky nods to Lord of the Rings and other like fantasy quest stories, and I'm just loving it. It's great. Speaking of Dark Tower, the other book I'm reading right now is The Gunslinger. So I'm rereading the Dark Tower series. I've been wanting to reread it for a while, and I decided it was time to do it. So starting at the beginning, rereading The Gunslinger by Stephen King. This book, I tried to read it, I think, 3 or 4 times before I actually read it. I started reading Stephen King when I was quite young. I think many people watching my channel know that. When I was 10 is when I started reading Stephen King. And I got a copy of The Gunslinger, and I was excited to read it because it was so short, especially. And I could not do it. It's such a wildly different novel, right, than so many of his other novels, and even from the other novels in the Dark Tower series. So it took me a couple tries before I got through it. But then when I finally got through it, I loved it, and I love the whole Dark Tower series. It is probably my favorite series that I've read. I don't know if I've read any other series that has a full 8 books in it. I don't know. I have to think on that. But I'm excited to reread the whole series. So I'm about halfway through with The Gunslinger. And then the other novel I'm reading right now, and again, this happens to line up with Horror Mayhem. It is the first day of May as I'm recording this video. So it happens to line up with Horror Mayhem, but it also is just the fluke that my library delivered this book to me today. And that is The Rising by Brian Keene. So The Rising is a zombie novel. It is Brian Keene's first novel, and it is kind of the novel that like put him on the map. He's written over 50 novels since then. And I just recently, I think yesterday, heard him in an interview, and he was talking about, the interviewer had said, like, suggest 3 of your novels that I should read to kind of be caught up with you for our conversation. And he didn't suggest The Rising. And he said, it was really interesting. He said, I can't ever badmouth that novel because it put me on the scene and it made me who I am. He's like, but I read it and it's really, really cringy. He's like, the way it deals with characters of color is just really bad. It just sounds like a white guy who doesn't know what he's talking about, writing really stereotypical characters of color. And there are just other things about it that are really cringy, that are a result of who I was, where I was, when I wrote that novel. And that's true. Like, I'm at a point where there are characters of color, and you're like, oof, okay, I see what you're going for here. Yet it also is one of the pieces of fiction that put like zombies back into the cultural zeitgeist. And so his take on zombies is different than what had come before it. And this novel came out right around the same time as 28 Days Later and a number of other zombie properties that really made zombies popular again. So I read one of his collections of short stories last year that were short stories that are set in the world of The Rising. And I think there are 3 or 4 other sequels to The Rising, and then another collection of short stories that are set in that world. And so I've been wanting to read the whole series, and so it became available to me as an audiobook. So I just started reading that today as well. So those are the 3 books that I'm currently reading. And now I have a really ambitious May planned, and I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't think it is. Not all these books, but we're going to try. So it is horror mayhem, right? But like I said in my teaser at the very beginning of this channel, horror is my favorite genre. I read horror all the time. Every month is horror mayhem for me. So I'm not going along with the prompt of trying to read every decade. I am just making sure that I infuse as much horror into my reading as I can. I've been reading a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, especially because I've been jumping into a lot of series. And because of that, there are more series in the speculative fiction space than there are in the horror space. Though I did read the Clown and Cornfield trilogy last month. But other than that, you don't see nearly as many series in the horror space. So I am going to be a little more intentional with my horror consumption this month, but that isn't that different than any other month. So let's see, what am I hoping to read this month? So I do have 3 arcs that I hope to read. The first one, I meant to read it last month and I didn't. That is Overgrowth by Mira Grant. I really, really enjoy Mira Grant. Everything I've read from Mira Grant, I've enjoyed. And so I'm looking forward to this one. This looks like space horror, and it's next on my TBR. So that's going to be happening really, really soon. I'm looking forward to it. The tagline says, Day of the Triffids meets Gretchen Folker Martin's Cuckoo. So right there, you know that it's going to be a little bit wild. So I'm looking forward to that. Next is The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling. And this, I am looking forward to. This is a medieval religious horror that involves cannibals. What can go wrong with that? That just sounds great to me. I will say I've read 2 books by Caitlin Starling, and one of them I loved, and one of them I thought was really slow for the first half, and the end was fine and interesting, but it took too long to get there for me to care a whole lot about it. So my relationship with her novel so far is 50-50, but the setting and the environment and just the logline for the story makes me really excited for it, so I have high hopes for it. And then the last advanced reader copy that I will be planning to read this month is I Can Fix Her by Ray Wilde, and the jacket copy of this describes it as How You Lose the Time War meets Things Have Gotten Last Since We Last Spoke. So this combination of really dark queer horror with kind of speculative fiction. And it's a fast-paced queer horror novel in which an obsessive woman stumbles into a second-chance romance with her flighty paramour, but it quickly deteriorates into a dark spiral of destruction. So we'll see how that goes. So those are the reader copies, the advanced reader copies that I hope to get through in May. Now, aside from that, the other books that I'm looking forward to, I have a few new horror books and then a few that are classics, or not classics, but vintage, let's put it that way. So When the Wolf Comes Home is Nat Cassidy's new book. I've heard nothing but great things about this. I'm really, really excited to read it. Again, I heard an interview with Nat Cassidy just very recently, which makes me even more excited to read this. And it actually got me thinking about another video that I want to be making soon, just about what it means, what kind of motivations writers have when they write their stories. So this is a werewolf / shapeshifter story that is really about fatherhood and about parenting, and I'm excited for it. So that is coming up. Next on the list is Wake Up and Open Your Eyes by Clay McCow Chaplin. Now, this is a political horror novel, and I actually read a short story of his in a collection called Found, which is a collection of found footage horror stories. And that short story was then expanded into this novel. And the novel, the basic premise is that there are certain TV channels and news channels, let's say, that when you watch them, they basically take over your life and you become a mindless zombie, a brutally violent, mindless zombie. Who knows what he could be commenting on? I'm not sure. But everyone I know that has read this has had really great things to say about it. So this, again, has been on the list for a while. I'm excited to get into it this month. Then the other one that is relatively new is a collection of short stories by Joe Lansdale called The Mad Mountains, or In the Mad Mountains. And this is a collection of short stories that are inspired by Lovecraft. You know, I've heard Joe Lansdale talk about Lovecraft and about his love for eldritch horror and cosmic horror, which he loves a lot more than he actually likes Lovecraft. I actually think I agree with him, having been reading Lovecraft all year, as many of his short stories as I can, very, very slowly working my way through an omnibus. Lansdale's position was he really loves Lovecraft's way of thinking, but he doesn't really like his writing so much. And so I'm excited to read his take on eldritch horror and cosmic horror. That is the other kind of contemporary horror novel or horror collection that is on my queue. And then as far as some that are a little more vintage, I have The White Plague by Frank Herbert. This is actually recommended by a subscriber when I had asked about other non-Dune related books written by Herbert that people suggested. This is one that came up, so I hope to read this. I've had it for a while. Again, I got it at a used bookstore, and I'm very lucky to find it. So this is coming up soon, I hope. I've had it for over a month, 2 months almost. I just haven't had time to read it. GARBOLOGY by Clive Barker. You know, I haven't read a lot of Clive Barker. I've read like the very famous things that he's written, but this is one I've never heard of before. So I'm excited to read this. And then some Richard Lehman. You know, who can go wrong with a little Richard Lehman? The Traveling Vampire Show is one of his more recent novels. Lehman was writing in a time where he was pushing boundaries, but he was not always doing it in a way that would be considered thoughtful or intentional by our current standards. But this is one of his more recent novels. So supposedly it doesn't fall victim to all that. I will say that when I read things like Richard Lehman, I understand and appreciate the time and place that those novels were written. And even like I am reading The Rising right now by Brian Keene, and the depiction of characters of color is like pretty cringeworthy, as the author himself said. You know, there's an ability to read a story, and sometimes that can be so bad that it makes you not able to appreciate the story. And I totally understand that. But a lot of time I'm able to put that down and say, okay, like this is not a great thing that this story is doing, but I can appreciate why and how and where the story was created, and then, you know, get over some of those obstacles. And so when you're reading vintage horror, you know, it's not unusual for those things to come up. Now, the other things that I hope to read in the month, so those are my horror selections that I hope to get through. That's not the most ambitious part of the month. You know, I have a number of series that I'm in the middle of that I really hope to finish. So I just started the Children of Time series. The next book is Children of Ruin. I actually hope I can read this and Children of Memory, the third one, both in May. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm hoping to. Of course, it kind of is a moot point because this is no longer a trilogy. There's a fourth book now announced, Children of Strife, and that's coming out in March of 2026. So I won't be able to finish that series no matter what, but I'm going to at least read Children of Ruin this month. That is also on the short end of my TBR. Then I want to read The Book That Held Her Heart. This is the final book in the Library trilogy by Mark Lawrence. I've been looking forward to this for quite a long time. The first two books I thought were really, really wonderful. So this is one that I have high expectations for. Then, of course, Ship of Destiny is the last book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy. And I had been reading one of these a month, and I didn't read this in April. I was meant to, and it just didn't happen. You know, it is all three books in this particular trilogy are over 900 pages. And it is just, you know, a little bit overwhelming to start a book that's that big when you have so many other books on your TBR. So this one kept getting put off, kept getting put off, and I haven't read it yet. So I really hope to rectify that in May, because there's still 9 more books in the Realm of the Elderlings series to read after I finish this trilogy. So this is the other one that I hope to finish this month. And then the last series that I hope to finish this month is going in a totally different direction from the horror novels I've been reading, is Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales by Heather Fawcett. This is the third book in her Emily Wilde series. The first one was Encyclopedia of Fairies, and the second one was The Map of the Other Worlds. And this is just a really delightful fantasy series about a scholar who studies fairies, essentially. And it's really great. It's really sweet. There's, you know, a little bit of a romance thing going on, at least starting in the second book, and there is some adventure, there's some action. It's not cozy per se, but it's not graphic in any way, and it's just a really delightful series. And so I'm hoping to read the third one. I do have a soft copy of it, but I really hope to get an audio book version of it. So I have a request in. We'll see when that request comes through, if it comes through in the month of May or not. But that is the last series that I hope to finish in the month of May. So over a dozen books in the month of May, and some of them are quite big. So I don't know if I'll get through all of them, but I'm going to do my best. You know, the month of May is going to be busy. Things in the monastery are going to pick back up, but on the flip side, I am not doing any teaching this whole month, or not until the very last week. So in the month of April, I taught every weekend. And what that means for me is traveling about 7 hours of travel to go teach for 2 days, and then 7 hours of travel to return home. And it's just kind of a lot of work to do multiple times in a month. Our schedule usually has me teaching twice a month, and one of those I teach online. So I only have to travel 1 weekend a month. But just due to different things happening this month, I taught all 4 weekends, and 3 of them I traveled. And that's just exhausting. It's nice on the bus to be able to read. I often get quite a lot of reading done on the bus, especially the bus to Bangalore. On the bus home the next day, I'm usually more tired, so it's harder to read when I'm that kind of exhausted. But teaching 4 weekends in a row while doing everything else, obviously, at the monastery was exhausting. And that was in April. So in May, I'm only teaching the last weekend. Hopefully, that will give me a lot more free time. Not that I don't appreciate teaching, that's the whole reason I study, right? That's the whole reason I do what I do, is so I can be of service to others. And that involves teaching, and that involves giving meditation instruction, that involves spiritual counseling, doing all those things that you do as a monk and as a religious leader. But the amount of energy it takes to physically travel to do those things while I'm a full-time student at the monastery still, it's just, it can be tiring. So this month, I hopefully will have a little more free time. And with that, I'm going to try to tackle this giant TBR, and we'll see how I go. I'd love to hear, what are your plans for the month of May? Do you have any interest in participating in Horror Mayhem? Are there any series that you're hoping to finish up? I am a completionist, and when I have series that are lingering, and I have novels that are part of a series that I haven't finished yet, I mean, if they haven't been published yet, so it's not my fault, that doesn't matter. But if it's a series that all the books have been published and I just haven't read them yet, I get twitchy around that. I like to have things completed. So I'm really looking forward to finishing some series this month. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. Can you read just one book in a series and then let the other books go for however long, or do you need to read them all at the same time? I don't do well just like letting them hang out. I get really anxious. So I'd love to hear if there are any series that you're reading, if there are any horror books you're reading, and what else is going on. I'd love to hear it down in the comments. But for now, I'll say thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.